Max Verstappen was dominating the Nürburgring. 21 straight hours leading the most dangerous endurance race in the world. Nearly 40 seconds ahead of everyone else. Mercedes completely untouchable. Toto Wolff already watching victory get closer with every lap. Then, the Mercedes GT3 started making a sound that instantly terrified the entire garage. No crash. No contact. No driver mistake. Just a tiny hidden failure that slowly destroyed the car from the inside, and turned certain victory into total heartbreak only 3 hours before the finish line. But here's the part that made the tension inside Mercedes explode. Engineers now believe the disaster may have secretly started almost 20 hours earlier, during one horrifying moment at over 200 km per hour, when Verstappen nearly launched the Mercedes into the barriers at one of the deadliest corners of the Nürburgring. At the time, people called it one of the greatest saves of the entire race. Now, many believe that exact impact quietly damaged the drivetrain beyond repair, while Verstappen kept dominating everybody anyway. And once Mercedes finally discovered the real reason behind the collapse, even Toto Wolff was left stunned by how brutally this victory disappeared. At first, almost nobody expected Max Verstappen to control this race the way he did. Not because of speed. Nobody questions his speed anymore. The real concern was the Nürburgring itself. Because this place is not a normal racing circuit. It feels more like a survival test. Modern Formula 1 tracks are smooth, predictable, controlled. The Nordschleife feels wild. Narrow roads through forests. Blind corners everywhere. Massive elevation changes. Barriers so close they almost feel attached to the car. And this race was absolute chaos from the very beginning. 161 cars on track together. Different categories. Different speeds. Total confusion everywhere. Imagine sprinting through highway traffic at night while people suddenly appear in front of you without warning. That is basically what drivers experience here for 24 straight hours. Mercedes knew exactly how dangerous the race would become once darkness arrived. That is why their opening strategy immediately caught attention inside the paddock. Instead of throwing Verstappen into the car immediately, the team started with Danny Juncadella. Calmly. Carefully. At first, it looked like a small tactical move. Later, it became obvious Mercedes was protecting Verstappen for the most dangerous phase of the race. The night stints. The cold conditions. The hours where concentration disappears and tiny mistakes become catastrophic. And honestly, the strategy worked perfectly in the beginning. Juncadella handled the opening traffic without panic while the Mercedes slowly climbed positions. No unnecessary risks. No chaos. Just disciplined endurance racing. Then Verstappen finally stepped into the car. And only minutes later, the Nürburgring nearly destroyed the entire race. The moment happened at Spiegelheuch, one of the most feared sections anywhere in motorsport. A crest so violent that GT3 cars literally leave the ground at terrifying speed. And Verstappen hit it at exactly the wrong angle. Suddenly, the Mercedes lifted into the air. The front became unstable. The car drifted sideways toward the barriers. For one horrifying second, it looked completely over. The onboard footage made it even scarier because the Mercedes no longer looked connected to the asphalt. It looked airborne. Weightless. Almost impossible to save. Most drivers probably crashed there instantly. Verstappen somehow saved it with pure instinct. Tiny steering corrections. No hesitation. No panic. At the time, fans celebrated it as one of the greatest saves of the entire event. But now, that moment looks completely different. Because many engineers and insiders believe that exact impact may have secretly damaged the car from the inside. Not visibly. Not immediately. Tiny microscopic fractures hidden deep inside the drivetrain. The kind of damage that stays invisible for hours before suddenly becoming catastrophic. And the terrifying part is this. Nobody inside Mercedes knew it yet. Because after surviving that moment, Verstappen did not slow down. He became even faster. Within the next few hours, the entire race changed completely. What started as a careful endurance strategy suddenly became total domination. Verstappen began hunting down every car in front of him, and the frightening part was how calm he looked doing it. No panic. No overdriving. No wasted movement. Just precision. First came the battle with the Lamborghini. A long, aggressive fight where every corner looked dangerous. And this is what makes the Nürburgring so terrifying compared to normal racing circuits. At tracks like Silverstone or Monza, drivers usually have runoff areas. Space for mistakes. Asphalt waiting if something goes wrong. At the Nordschleife, the barriers are right there beside you. One tiny error and the race is instantly over. But Verstappen looked completely locked in. Eventually, he cleared the Lamborghini cleanly and immediately focused on the next target ahead. The Grello Porsche. one of the strongest endurance racing cars on the grid. The car many people expected to dominate the race once night arrived. Verstappen chased it down anyway. Lap after lap, the gap started shrinking. And once he reached the back of the Porsche, the pressure became enormous. Because overtaking at the Nürburgring is nothing like overtaking in Formula 1. Drivers are constantly dealing with slower traffic while fighting rivals from their own category at the exact same time. Imagine trying to sprint through a crowded airport while people suddenly stop in front of you every few seconds. That is basically what endurance racing feels like here. And somehow, Verstappen made it look controlled. Almost easy. Then finally, he made the move for the lead. The Mercedes number 3 officially took control of the Nürburgring 24 hours less than 3 hours into the race. That moment completely changed the atmosphere around the paddock. Because suddenly, this was no longer a Formula 1 champion trying endurance racing for fun. Now people inside motorsport started realizing something much bigger. Max Verstappen could actually win this race on his first serious attempt. And once darkness covered the Nordschleife, things became even more impressive. Because nighttime at the Nürburgring changes everything. Visibility drops. Temperatures fall. Fatigue starts attacking concentration. This is usually where races collapse. But somehow, Verstappen looked even stronger after sunset. That was the terrifying part for Mercedes rivals. The Mercedes GT3 did not just stay competitive. It started disappearing into the distance. The lead kept growing. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Almost 40 seconds at one stage. 40 seconds at the Nürburgring feels massive. On a circuit this long and dangerous, that kind of gap means one team is operating at a completely different level from everybody else. The pit stops looked flawless. The strategy worked perfectly. The driver rotation stayed calm and precise. Everything inside the Mercedes garage felt controlled. Relaxed. Almost confident. And this is where the tension around Toto Wolff quietly started changing. Because after hour of dominance, Mercedes no longer looked like a team fighting for victory. They looked like a team already preparing to celebrate it. Honestly, almost nobody believed they could lose from that position anymore. Very few cars dominate the Nürburgring for 21 straight hours and still fail to finish. Especially not with Verstappen driving like this. But hidden underneath all that control, the Mercedes may already have been slowly destroying itself from the inside. And nobody inside the garage realized the nightmare had already started. Then came the sound that changed everything. At first, almost nobody noticed it. The Mercedes was still leading comfortably. The lap time still looked strong. Nothing on the timing screen suggested disaster was coming. But inside the cockpit, something felt wrong. A strange metallic noise started coming from the rear of the Mercedes. And this is where endurance racing becomes emotionally brutal. Because unlike a crash, mechanical failures usually arrive slowly. Quietly. Like a hidden countdown nobody can stop. At first, the sound seemed small. The kind of noise drivers sometimes ignore during endurance races because GT3 cars are constantly under pressure. Heavy vibrations. Aggressive bumps. Endless stress through every corner. But this noise kept getting worse. Lap after lap, fans listening to the onboard cameras could actually hear the Mercedes slowly breaking itself apart. That detail makes this story feel even darker. People were literally hearing Verstappen's dream collapse in real time. The sound became sharper, more metallic, more violent. Like the car itself was warning Mercedes that something deep inside the drivetrain was failing. But the team kept pushing. And honestly, you can understand why. They were leading by nearly 40 seconds. After 21 exhausting hours controlling the Nürburgring, victory starts feeling emotionally close even when several hours still remain. That changes the psychology inside a garage. You stop imagining disaster. You start imagining celebration. And this is exactly why the tension inside Mercedes suddenly became impossible to hide. Because the problem quickly turned serious. Danny Juncadella could feel the rear of the car behaving strangely. The suspension no longer felt stable. Something underneath the Mercedes was collapsing. The car finally returned to the garage. And within moments, the mechanics understood the nightmare they were facing. The transmission shaft had failed. Now for casual fans, that may not sound catastrophic immediately. But imagine riding a bicycle when the chain suddenly snaps under pressure. Your legs still move. The pedals still spin. But the power never reaches the wheels anymore. That is essentially what happened here. The transmission shaft transfers power from the engine to the rear wheels. Without it, the car becomes almost useless. And then the situation became even worse. Because the broken shaft had already damaged multiple surrounding components. The wheel carrier suffered serious damage. Additional suspension parts were affected. The failure spread through the rear of the car like falling dominoes. That is what truly stunned Mercedes. This was no quick repair anymore. At the Nürburgring, replacing one damaged component already costs valuable time. But once the damage spreads into structural parts around the suspension, the repair becomes painfully complicated. And time was disappearing fast. Only 3 hours remained in the race. 3 hours separating Verstappen from one of the biggest victories outside Formula One of his entire career. At first, Mercedes still tried to sound optimistic publicly. Team boss Steve Bushman said they would repair the car and return to the track. But inside the garage, reality was becoming impossible to hide. The mechanics were no longer fighting for victory. Now they were fighting against time itself. And slowly, the confidence inside Mercedes transformed into something much heavier. Disbelief. Frustration. Tension. Because after 21 hours of perfection, Toto Wolff and Mercedes were suddenly watching victory disappear, without being able to stop it. And then, Mercedes finally made the decision nobody inside that garage wanted to hear. The car was retiring. After leading the Nürburgring 24 hours for almost 21 straight hours, Max Verstappen's Mercedes GT3 was officially out of the race. Just like that. No dramatic crash. No fire. No massive television moment. Only silence inside the garage while one of the strongest performances of the entire event disappeared completely. And honestly, that silence may have hurt more than a crash ever could. Because crashes feel sudden. Violent. Emotional. This felt empty. Like watching someone climb a mountain for an entire day, only to fall a few steps before reaching the top. The timing made it even more brutal. Mercedes was not barely surviving anymore. They were dominating. Nearly 40 seconds ahead. 3 hours remaining. Victory almost guaranteed. Statistically, races almost never collapse from that position. Especially not with Max Verstappen driving like this. And this is why the reaction across the paddock became so emotional afterward. People were not just surprised. They were genuinely shocked. Because Verstappen had already conquered the hardest parts of the Nürburgring. The opening traffic chaos. The terrifying night stints. The mental exhaustion. The pressure of leading for hours. He handled all of it like a specialist who had raced there for years. That is what made the retirement feel so cruel. And then came the most painful irony of all. Another Mercedes won the race. The Mercedes number 80 inherited the lead after Verstappen's collapse and eventually crossed the finish line first. Same manufacturer. Same GT3 platform. Completely opposite emotions. Imagine what that must have felt like inside Mercedes. One garage celebrating victory. Another garage devastated. One Mercedes becoming the hero of the Nürburgring. The other becoming the heartbreak everyone would remember. And this is where Toto Wolff reportedly became completely stunned by the entire collapse. Because this was not supposed to happen to Mercedes. Not after 21 hours of flawless execution. Not after dominating the race so comfortably. Not after Verstappen delivered one of the strongest endurance performances of his entire career. But the deeper truth may actually be even worse. Because engineers later suggested the race may have secretly been lost during that terrifying airborne moment early in the event. That near disaster at Spiegelhuge. The moment where Verstappen somehow kept the Mercedes out of the barriers at over 200 km/h. At the time, fans celebrated it as one of the greatest saves of the entire race. Now, many believe that exact impact may have created microscopic fractures inside the drivetrain. Tiny hidden weaknesses impossible to detect immediately. And if that theory is true, it changes the entire story completely. Because it means the Mercedes may have been slowly destroying itself for almost the entire race, while still dominating everybody else. Think about how terrifying that really is. A wounded car. A hidden mechanical failure. 21 hours of punishment around the most dangerous endurance circuit in the world. And somehow, Verstappen still built a massive lead before the machine finally gave up underneath him. That is why so many people inside motorsport left the Nürburgring with a completely different level of respect for him afterward. Because this race proved something important. Max Verstappen is not just a Formula One driver dominating one category. He can step into one of the hardest endurance races on Earth, against experienced specialists, and immediately become the fastest and most feared driver on the track. And honestly, that realization may scare his rivals far more than the retirement itself. Because if Verstappen was already this dangerous in his first real Nürburgring attempt, what happens the next time he comes back?